Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Tuesday, September 28th. This is Africa 54.
Congo's car exhaust drug craze causes alarm, raising worldwide awareness about prevention and control of rabies. And R&B superstar R. Kelly is convicted of racketeering and sex trafficking charges.
We begin in West Africa. Military leaders in Guinea say an 81-member Transitional National Council will agree on the length of a transition to elections amid pressure from regional leaders. David Doyle has more.
Guinea's junta has barred its members from standing in the country's next elections, as it outlines its own political course after a coup earlier this month. Coup leader Mamadi Doumbouya has also been confirmed as president of a transition until elections are held. He's shrugged off asset freezes and travel bans imposed by the region's main political and economic bloc. The Economic Community of West African states is trying to pressure a swift return to constitutional rule. On Monday, the junta said the length of time before elections will be agreed by an 81-member Transitional National Council. Over the past 2 weeks, Guinea's military leaders have held consultations with public figures and business leaders to map out a framework for transition. According to the charter, Doumbouya will lead a transitional government composed of a civilian prime minister and cabinet. None of them can stand as candidates when national or local elections are held, a junta spokesperson said on the state broadcaster. The spokesperson said that the Transitional National Council must be at least 30% female and will include a president and 2 vice presidents. They are also not allowed to run for office in the upcoming elections. Regional leaders had imposed the sanctions on Guinea to deter a democratic backslide after West and Central Africa witnessed 4 military-led coups since last year.
David Doyle of Reuters filed that report. The northern Nigerian state of Kaduna was the scene of a massacre early Monday. State government officials say armed men killed at least 34 people in 2 villages. Kaduna government officials say 34 people were killed in the village of Madamai. But one resident speaking by phone says he counted 44 bodies in the local mortuary from attacks on Madamai and neighboring Aboom village. A government statement revealed that security forces who had gone to the scene came under fire but forced attackers to withdraw after an intense exchange. The 2 suspects who were wielding guns and machetes are under arrest in connection with the attack. A new drug craze in the Democratic Republic of Congo's capital, Kinshasa, is fueling fears over the health impact and a rush of thefts of catalytic converters. Clara Frank has more.
Guinea's junta has barred its members from standing in the country's next elections, as it outlines its own political course after a coup earlier this month. Coup leader Mamadi Doumbouya has also been confirmed as president of a transition until elections are held. He's shrugged off asset freezes and travel bans imposed by the region's main political and economic bloc. The Economic Community of West African states is trying to pressure a swift return to constitutional rule. On Monday, the junta said the length of time before elections will be agreed by an 81-member Transitional National Council. Over the past 2 weeks, Guinea's military leaders have held consultations with public figures and business leaders to map out a framework for transition. According to the charter, Doumbouya will lead a transitional government composed of a civilian prime minister and cabinet. None of them can stand as candidates when national or local elections are held, a junta spokesperson said on the state broadcaster. The spokesperson said that the Transitional National Council must be at least 30% female and will include a president and 2 vice presidents. They are also not allowed to run for office in the upcoming elections. Regional leaders had imposed the sanctions on Guinea to deter a democratic backslide after West and Central Africa witnessed 4 military-led coups since last year.
We apologize for that video. Hopefully we'll get you the Congo one as soon as we're able to. Moving on, Zambia's debt to Chinese public and private lenders is a staggering $6.6 billion, almost double the amount disclosed by the previous Zambian government, according to an analysis of loan data by the China-Africa Research Initiative. Copper-rich Zambia became Africa's first coronavirus-era sovereign default last November, and its ongoing debt restructuring has become a test of Western multilateral efforts for countries to fully disclose their borrowings. Zambia's previous government, led by Edgar Lungu, said its Chinese debt stood at $3.4 billion. The country's international creditors, which the government is in talks with, are complaining that the lack of detail on Zambia's China loans, which carry specific non-disclosure terms, is hindering the debt restructuring progress. Following an attempted coup last week, relations within Sudan's fragile military-civilian transition to democracy have hit a low point. Emma McCarthy explains.
A leading figure in Sudan's transition to civilian democratic rule has told people to be prepared to protest. That's amid a low point in relations between the country's military and civilian rulers following an attempted coup last week. And it's brought the country's transition to democratic civilian rule to its most precarious position since former President Omar al-Bashir was ousted. Mohamed Al-Faki Suleiman, who leads a committee which is dismantling the financial and political apparatus of Sudan's previous regime, was speaking to crowds on Sunday.
We will defend our government, our people, and the democratic transition to the last drop of blood. And if there is any threat to democratic transition, we will fill the streets and be at the forefront, as is our responsibility.
A fragile military-civilian partnership has been governing Sudan since Bashir was overthrown in 2019. Last Tuesday, soldiers loyal to Bashir attempted a coup. Generals have since accused politicians of alienating the armed forces and failing to govern properly. Civilian officials claimed the military was agitating for a takeover of power. On Sunday, members of Suleiman's body, the Committee to Dismantle the June 30, 1989 regime and retrieve public funds, said they were told the military had withdrawn protection from its headquarters and 22 assets. Police officers had replaced the soldiers, they said. Suleiman, who is also a member of Sudan's highest authority, the Joint Military-Civilian Sovereign Council, said his personal protection had been removed.
I was not afraid when the guards were withdrawn from me. I am guarded with all this love.
In a speech on Sunday, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, head of the Sovereign Council, said the military would not stage a coup against the transition, but he remained critical of civilian politicians. In a statement late on Sunday, civilian Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok said the dispute is not between the military and civilians, but between those who believe in the civilian democratic transition and those who want to block it.
That was Emma McCarthy of Reuters reporting. September 28th is World Rabies Day. Rabies is a fatal but vaccine-preventable disease caused by a virus that affects the central nervous system. It is one of the oldest diseases known to mankind, and it continues to pose a threat to humans and animals. Tens of thousands of people die from rabies each year, mainly in Asia and Africa. Experts say rabies is fatal once clinical symptoms appear. It can spread to people and pets if they are bitten or scratched by a rabid animal. Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu spoke with Professor Louis Nell, Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Rabies Control.
The rabies virus, it's quite a miserable disease. The virus travels up to the the brain of the infected person, and death then follows. But it can be something like fatigue, headache, fever. Those can be initial symptoms, and then it can progress into hallucinations, light sensitivity, hydrophobia, fear of water, and it's all connected with things that go wrong in the brain. It is essentially going to making somebody crazy, and certainly making these animals also crazy. They behave completely abnormal, completely aggressive. This hypersalivation that you get, and this is in humans and in animals. You do get the two forms. The one is the furious form, which is the more common one, the one that I've just explained. Then there's the second manifestation is the dumb form, in which an animal or a human simply become paralyzed.
How do people get rabies? This common idea is that dogs are the one who bite people and then people get infected, but there's more to it than that.
We calculate that there's almost 60,000 people per year dying from rabies, most of them in Africa and Asia. 99% of them from infected dogs. So dogs really truly are the source of the virus that is then transmitted to humans. A dog gets infected and then transmits the virus to another dog. Humans then are intermediate hosts. So if you get in the way of a rabid dog, you can be bitten by that dog. By the time the dog is rabid, there would be a lot of virus in the brain. The virus migrates to the salivary glands. When you are then bitten, the virus is transmitted through the saliva. The virus then enters the peripheral nerve system and then travels through the central nervous system all the way to the brain.
And they say about rabies that once the symptoms are manifesting in a person, then it's too late.
Correct. A very important thing about rabies is that it can be prevented through post-exposure. The first thing is when a person is bitten by a suspected rabid animal, that wound must be very thoroughly washed for as long as you can. The WHO, World Health Organization, recommend 15 minutes with soap and water, running water, if possible. Thereafter, such a person should get medical care, which would then include a schedule of vaccines, and the medical professionals will be able to tell the person how often this should happen. Also, immune globulin, if that is potentially available. Once symptoms appeared, so once the virus reached the brain, there's nothing you can do, and then it's invariably fatal.
So how long is the incubation then?
The virus needs to travel to the brain. If you're bitten on the ankle, for example, there's a long way that the virus needs to travel all the way to the brain. If you're bitten in the neck, the travel time will be shorter. So then the incubation time will be shorter. So typically between 1 and 8 weeks for humans, but it can be shorter and it can be longer.
Talk to us about the incidence of rabies in developing countries, especially in Africa.
Good rabies control would rely on good public health measures and good public health infrastructure, and sometimes this is lacking in many African countries. The way to prevent rabies in humans would be to eliminate it in dogs. Dogs need to be vaccinated, and we need to achieve herd immunity in dogs.
How can someone tell if a dog has rabies, or any animal for that matter?
There are signs in animals. Usually when animals act very aggressively where they shouldn't. In a rabies endemic country, if you are bitten by a dog, you should assume that there's a risk and you should immediately seek care. And I think that would be the advice also to anybody traveling to an African city. If you are bitten by a dog or you're exposed in some way, you should assume that there's a rabies risk and you should seek the necessary medical care. The World Rabies Day initiative is one of the things to make people more aware of this disease, and that it is still a serious problem in many parts of the world. and it's an unnecessary problem. And the disease, in fact, had been eliminated in many countries of the world. And we need to create tools that would make it easier for them to do that. So advocacy, educational tools, and then tools like surveillance. Everybody now knows from the COVID pandemic how important surveillance is.
Professor Louis-Nel, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Lenore.
That was Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu speaking with Professor Louis-Nel, Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Rabies Control. Let us know what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come. An American R&B singer has been convicted in a sex trafficking trial after decades of allegations of misconduct with young women and children. But first, Heidi Adams tells us what's coming up on Wednesday's edition of Straight Talk Africa.
Join me on the next Straight Talk Africa. We're going to talk about the weather. Climate change is wreaking havoc worldwide, and many African countries are already feeling the heat. But is it time we change the way we think and talk about the climate emergency? We'll look at what's behind the growing call for climate justice across Africa, and we'll shine a spotlight on young Africans who are taking climate action in their countries. Join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Concern is growing over the reach of China's so-called national security law that it recently imposed on Hong Kong. Britain warned several of its citizens that they could face arrest and extradition to the former British colony. Henry Rijo reports from London.
China imposed the national security law on Hong Kong in June 2020 in response to anti-government protests, claiming it would restore order to the territory. Critics say it curtails basic democratic freedoms. Well over 100 people have been arrested under the legislation. Among them is opposition activist Andy Lee, who was charged with foreign collusion in 2020 after allegedly lobbying foreign governments to impose sanctions on Hong Kong and China. Several British citizens were named in the court papers. Earlier this month, the British government told them they could face arrest and extradition to Hong Kong if they travelled to any country that had an extradition agreement with the Chinese territory. Among them was US-born British citizen Bill Browder, who has campaigned globally for so-called Magnitsky sanctions against human rights abusers.
Specifically, my name was mentioned because I was having discussions with various people about Magnitsky sanctions against the Hong Kong officials who were involved in this suppression of democracy. After alerting me to my name being in the document, the Foreign Office officials pointed out to me that the Chinese national security law doesn't just apply domestically to residents of Hong Kong, it applies to anyone, anywhere in the world.
Browder has already faced several attempts by Russia to have him arrested and extradited on fraud charges through Interpol, the global agency that communicates arrest warrants between police forces. Browder says the charges are clearly politically motivated.
I basically contain my travel to what I describe as rule of law countries. So, for example, I won't travel to South Africa, even though I actually own a home in South Africa, because it's not really considered to be a rule of law country. Whereas I would travel to Germany regardless of what treaties they have, because I know that a German court will not hand me over to Russians or Chinese on politically motivated cases.
More than a dozen countries have extradition agreements with Hong Kong, including India, South Africa and Portugal. British pro-democracy activist Luke de Pulford was also named in the Hong Kong court papers and approached by the British Foreign Office.
It's a really sad indictment and reflection on the UK's cowering before China. We're now in a situation that, having failed to honour their promises to the people of Hong Kong, the UK is telling people that they can't go to third countries because they might end up in prison.
Under the joint declaration signed between Britain and China before the 1997 handover of Hong Kong, Beijing promised to maintain the territory's autonomy under the so-called Basic Law. In a statement, the British government told VOA the UK will not look the other way on Hong Kong and we will not duck our historic responsibilities to its people. As a co-signatory to the joint declaration, we will continue to stand up for the people of Hong Kong. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
The US withdrawal from Afghanistan did little to reduce tensions between India and Pakistan. Anita Powell reports from the White House on how President Biden, fresh from a historic meeting with India's leader, is approaching relations with the two South Asian rivals.
A new era for the U.S.-India relationship, with a historic meeting between the two nations' leaders. In a joint statement, they described the meeting as a partnership for global good.
I think that the relationship between India and the United States, the largest democracies in the world, is destined to be stronger, closer, and tighter, and I think it can benefit the whole world.
But what about Pakistan? The nation is wedged between its arch-nemesis, nuclear-powered India, and volatile Afghanistan. In recent weeks, since U.S. withdrawal, thousands of desperate Afghans have fled to Pakistan to escape the new Taliban government. As U.S. President Joe Biden met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Friday, Pakistan's leader took to the world stage at the UN General Assembly to ask that very pointed question and to accuse the U.S. of hurting Pakistan during its 20-year conflict in Afghanistan.
There's a lot of worry about in the U.S. about taking care of the people who helped them, the interpreters and everyone who helped the U.S. What about us? The only reason we suffered so much was because we became an ally of the U.S., of the coalition in the war against Afghanistan.
Those remarks are likely to inflame tensions between the U.S. and Pakistan and between Pakistan and India.
It's clear that the Biden administration has lost patience with Pakistan and its leadership, which it feels has played a double game over Afghanistan, pretending to be an ally, but actually supporting the enemies of the United States.
VOA asked White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki why the leaders of the U.S. and Pakistan have not met face-to-face, especially after Biden last week vowed to embrace what he called aggressive diplomacy.
We have been in touch at very high levels with leaders in Pakistan, from the State Department, from the Department of Defense, and from other key components of the administration. The president has not spoken with every foreign leader at this point in time. That is absolutely true. But he, of course, has a team, an expert team deployed to do exactly that.
And analysts say such a high-level engagement may not be productive.
For the Biden administration, having a call with Prime Minister Khan wouldn't necessarily get anything done in a substantive way. The other reason, though, why I think that we haven't seen this call between Biden and Khan is that the U.S. has long looked at its relationship with Pakistan through a transactional lens. It's a very transactional relationship. And I think that U.S. officials would not want to give Pakistan the privilege or the pleasure of a call between Imran Khan and Biden just for the sake of having the call.
Sheikh says Pakistan has only one interpretation of the U.S.'s new coziness with India.
This is a zero-sum game for Pakistan. Moving towards India can only mean one thing, and that is moving against Pakistan.
These meetings heralded a new phase in U.S.-India relations, with Pakistan, it seems, watching from the sidelines. Anita Powell, VOA News, at the White House.
R. Kelly, the superstar American R&B singer known for his anthem, I Believe I Can Fly, was convicted Monday in a sex trafficking trial after decades of avoiding criminal responsibility for numerous allegations of misconduct with young women and children. A jury of 7 men and 5 women found Kelly guilty of racketeering on their second day of deliberations. Kelly remained motionless, eyes downcast as the verdict was read. The charges were based on an argument that the entourage of managers and aides who helped the singer meet goals amounted to a criminal enterprise. Kelly's lawyer plans to file an appeal.
Of course, Mr. Kelly is disappointed. He was not anticipating this verdict because based on the evidence, why should he anticipate this verdict? When you go over the discovery, you saw witness after witnesses giving 3, 4, 5 different versions as to what they said happened here.
Widespread public condemnation didn't come until a widely watched docu-series, Surviving R. Kelly, helped make his case a signifier of the Me Too movement and gave voice to accusers who wondered if their stories were previously ignored because they were black women. Tarana Burke, founder of the Me Too movement, says Kelly's conviction shows women of color that they matter.
This has been a long time coming. This has been a very long time coming. So not only the survivors, but for the organizers and activists and writers and just like plethora of black women and some of our allies who have been at this for the longest time, who've been ringing the alarm for the longest time. It felt like, gosh, this is not always the way justice will be served, if we can call it justice, but at least it feels like something.
Kelly was also convicted of criminal counts accusing him of violating the Mann Act, which makes it illegal to take anyone across state lines for any immoral purpose. That wraps up our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, we thank you for watching.